I always thought Mary and I had the kind of marriage that could weather anything. We had been through my deployments, the sleepless nights raising Sean, and the constant pressure of balancing military life with family. She wasn't just my wife, she was my anchor, the person who kept everything together while I was thousands of miles away. But during my latest deployment, something changed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It started with our Skype calls. They used to be the highlight of my day, even if we only had a few minutes to talk. Mary would light up the screen with her stories about Sean and updates on life back home. But now, she seemed distant, her camera off and off, and her responses short, almost mechanical. At first, I told myself she was just stressed. Managing everything at home while I was gone wasn't easy, and I tried to be understanding. But there were moments when my gut told me otherwise. I'd ask about Sean's school or the business, and she'd change the subject. She wasn't the Mary the first knew, and that realization gnawed at me in a way I couldn't ignore. One night, during a quiet moment in the barracks, I brought it up to my buddy Tom. "Do you ever feel like something's off back home?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Tom didn't answer right away. He just gave me this look, the kind that says he knew exactly what I meant but didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. "Bill, you know your wife better than anyone. But if your gut's telling you something, maybe it's worth paying attention to." I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Mary, about the woman I thought I knew, and about the unsettling feeling that maybe I didn't know her as well as I believed. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my deployment. That uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Every time I talked to Mary, I felt like I was trying to connect with someone who was no longer there. She started avoiding video calls altogether, claiming she was too busy or too tired. When we did talk, it felt like she was rushing to get off the phone. The warmth in her voice, the little details she used to share about her day, were gone. One night, during a rare call, I asked her how things were going with Sean. It was an innocent enough question, but her answer caught me off guard. "He's fine, just busy with school," she said, almost dismissively. "Busy with what?" I pressed, trying to keep the conversation going. "I don't know, Bill. Homework, projects, normal stuff," she replied, sounding annoyed. That's when it hit me. Mary had always been so invested in every little thing Sean did. She'd send me photos of his drawings, videos of him playing outside, updates on his progress at school. Now, it was like she didn't even care. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the changes in her. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that being apart was taking its toll on both of us. But deep down, I knew there was more to it. I just didn't know what. The night after that call, I lay awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I replayed every conversation we'd had over the past few weeks, every moment that felt off. The next day, I decided to call Don Sterling, a close friend back home. Don was the kind of guy who always seemed to know what was going on in people's lives, whether they wanted him to or not. If anyone could help me make sense of what was happening, it was him. "Don, I need to ask you something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure, Bill. What's on your mind?" "It's Mary," I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Something's off. She's acting different. Distant. Have you noticed anything?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough to make my heart pound. Finally, Don sighed. "Bill, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but, yeah. I've noticed some things." My stomach dropped. "What things?" "She's been seen around town with someone," Don said carefully. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they've been spotted at a few places together, restaurants, the park. "It doesn't look like nothing, Bill." Hearing those words felt like a punch to the gut. My mind raced with questions. Who was this person? How long had this been going on? And most of all, why? Don continued, his voice low and steady. I've also seen some photos. Messages. I hate to bring this up, Bill, but you need to know the truth. I asked him to send me everything he had. When the pictures and screenshots came through, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. There she was, laughing with some guy I didn't recognize. The texts were even worse, flirty, intimate, filled with inside jokes that clearly weren't meant for me. My hands shook as I stared at my laptop screen. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I had built my life with, the mother of my child, could betray me like this. That night, I barely slept. The images and messages played over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. By morning, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to confront her, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, I called Mary. My hands were shaking as I dialed, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was going to say or how she would respond, but I knew I couldn't keep this inside any longer. When she answered, her voice sounded the same as it always had, calm, collected, like nothing was wrong. Hey, Bill, she said casually. Hey, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. Sure, she said, but there was a hesitation in her voice, as if she knew what was coming. Mary, I began, swallowing hard. I know what's been going on. There was a pause. What do you mean? She asked, her tone defensive. Don't play games with me, I said, my voice sharper now. I've seen the pictures. The messages. I know about him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, I heard her take a deep breath. Bill. I'm sorry, she said softly. Her words hit me like a freight train. You're sorry. I repeated, my voice rising. That's all you have to say? After everything we've been through? I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I was lonely, Bill. You're always gone. It's hard being by myself all the time. Lonely? I shot back, my anger boiling over. You think I'm not lonely out here? You think it's easy for me, being away from you and Sean? I'm doing this for us, for our future. I know, she said, tears in her voice now. I know, and I hate myself for it. But it just happened. I wasn't thinking. I didn't mean to hurt you. Her excuses felt like knives cutting into me. You didn't mean to hurt me. Mary, you destroyed everything. How do you come back from something like this? She didn't answer. Instead, she started crying, and for the first time in years, I felt completely helpless. I had faced enemies in war zones, made life-or-death decisions, but nothing had prepared me for this. I need some time, I said finally, my voice cold and distant. I can't deal with this right now. Before she could respond, I hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal so overwhelming I thought I might break under the weight of it. That night, I sat alone in my barracks, staring at the walls. I thought about Sean, about the life we had built, and about how easily it could all fall apart. After the call ended, I sat there, stunned and numb. It felt like the ground had opened beneath me, and I was free-falling into a darkness I couldn't escape. I tried to process what had just happened, but the truth was, I didn't even know where to start. Mary had admitted it. No more guessing, no more suspicions, it was out in the open now. The woman I had trusted with my heart, my son, my entire life, had betrayed me. And for what? Loneliness? A fleeting distraction. It felt like everything I had sacrificed, years spent away from home, missing Sean's milestones, putting my life on the line, meant nothing to her. That night, sleep was impossible. I replayed our entire relationship in my head, looking for signs I might have missed. Was this my fault? Had I been too focused on my career? Too blind to see that Mary was struggling? I wanted to be angry at her, to hate her for what she had done, but the truth was more complicated. Underneath the anger was a deep sadness, a sense of loss so profound it felt like mourning a death. The life I thought we had, the future I had envisioned for our family, it was gone. The next morning, I called Don. He didn't say much, just listened as I vented everything I was feeling: anger, confusion, despair. "What do I do, Don?" I asked finally. "You've got to think about Sean," he said. "Whatever happens between you and Mary, he's the one who matters most." That hit me hard. Sean. I hadn't even begun to think about how this would affect him. He was just a kid, innocent, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. I knew, no matter how much pain I was in, I had to protect him from this mess. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Mary. I needed time to think, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I talked to Tom and a few other friends, men who had been through their own struggles in marriage. Everyone had advice. Some told me to fight for my marriage, others said to walk away. In the end, I realized the decision wasn't about what anyone else thought. It was about what I could live with. Could I ever trust Mary again? Could I look at her without seeing her betrayal? As much as I wanted to believe we could fix things, deep down, I knew the damage was too great. The hardest part was accepting that it wasn't just about me. Sean deserved a stable, happy home, and I couldn't give him that with a wife I no longer trusted. The thought of raising him in a house filled with tension and resentment was unbearable. I reached out to a lawyer, a friend of a friend who specialized in civil cases. We talked through my options, focusing on what was best for Sean. The lawyer suggested setting up a trust for him, ensuring his financial future was secure no matter what happened between Mary and me. It was a small step, but it gave me a sense of control in a situation where I felt powerless. When I finally called Mary again, I was calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but steady. "I know," she replied, sounding small and defeated. "I've thought about this a lot," I began. "I can't pretend everything's okay. What you did, it broke something between us. And I don't think it can be fixed." Her silence was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry, Bill. I never wanted this to happen." "I believe you," I said. "But sorry doesn't undo what's been done. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." I heard her gasp, followed by quiet sobs. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would all be okay, but I knew I couldn't. I had to be strong, for Sean, and for myself. "I'll make sure Sean is taken care of," I continued. "But I need you to leave the house. I think it's best if Sean stays with my parents for a while." Mary didn't argue. Maybe she knew she didn't have the right to. Maybe she was as tired as I was of pretending everything was fine. "Okay," she whispered. When the call ended, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It wasn't the ending I had imagined for our story, but it was the only one that felt right. The days after that conversation with Mary felt surreal. I had made the decision to end my marriage, but the reality of it hadn't fully sunk in yet. There were so many moving parts: legal paperwork, arrangements for Sean, and trying to keep my focus on my duties overseas. On the surface, I managed to stay calm, but inside, I felt like I was barely holding it together. The first thing I did was call my parents. They were my rock, and I knew I could count on them to help me figure out how to navigate this. When I explained the situation, they were heartbroken but supportive. My mom's first words were, "We'll take care of Sean. You just focus on getting through this." Hearing that brought me to tears. Sean was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely, and knowing he would be safe and loved made all the difference. After arranging for Sean to stay with my parents, I focused on the logistics of separating from Mary. The lawyer I'd spoken to was efficient, walking me through the process of setting up a trust for Sean and filing the divorce papers. It was straightforward on paper, but every signature felt like a weight pressing down on me. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about acknowledging that the life I had envisioned was gone. The hardest part of all of this was telling Sean. I called my parents to arrange a time when we could talk over video. When his little face appeared on the screen, smiling and excited to see me, my chest tightened. How could I explain to a 7-year-old that his world was about to change? "Hey, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "How are you doing?" "Good. Grandma and Grandpa are fun," he said, holding up a drawing he'd made. "That's awesome, Sean. I'm glad you're having a good time." I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Listen, I need to tell you something important." He tilted his head, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "Mom and we're not going to live together anymore," I said gently. "But I want you to know that we both love you so much, and nothing will ever change that." Sean frowned, his little brow furrowing. "Why?" he asked. "It's hard to explain," I said, my voice cracking. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix. But this isn't your fault, okay? And we're going to make sure you're happy and taken care of." He didn't say much after that, just nodded quietly. It broke my heart to see him trying to process something so big at such a young age. After the call ended, I sat in my barracks, staring at the wall, feeling like I had failed him. The next few weeks were a blur. My friends on the base rallied around me, offering support in their own ways. Tom was especially helpful, making sure I stayed grounded. He dragged me to the gym when I felt like lying in bed all day, made me laugh with ridiculous stories, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. Back home, my parents kept me updated on Sean. They sent me pictures of him playing outside, videos of him laughing with their dog, and little notes he'd written for me. Those updates were a lifeline, reminding me that I still had a purpose, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. As the days turned into weeks, I started to reflect on what had happened. Mary's betrayal hurt more than I could put into words, but I also began to understand that holding on to that anger would only hurt me more. One evening, during a quiet moment in the barracks, I wrote her a letter. Not to rekindle anything, but to let go of the bitterness I was carrying. "Mary," I wrote, "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why things happened the way they did. I trusted you, and you broke that trust in a way that's hard to forgive. But for Sean's sake, I want us to be able to move forward. He deserves 2 parents who can put him first, even if we can't be together. I hope you can find peace, and I'll be working on finding mine." Writing those words felt like a weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet, but I could take the first step toward healing. Not long after, I received a message from my mom. "Sean's been asking about you a lot," she said. "He misses his dad." It was a reminder of why I was doing all of this. My relationship with Mary might have been over, but my role as Sean's father was more important than ever. I started making plans for my return home, determined to be there for him in every way I could. It wouldn't be easy, but if there was one thing the military had taught me, it was resilience. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. I could rebuild, if not the life I'd had, then something new, something stronger. And I could do it for Sean. The day I stepped off the plane and onto American soil, I was hit with a mix of relief and anxiety. My deployment was over, but the battle ahead felt just as daunting. I was returning not to the home I once knew, but to a life that had been torn apart by betrayal. My parents were waiting for me at the terminal, and seeing Sean with them was the first real moment of joy I'd felt in weeks. He ran toward me, his little arms outstretched, and I scooped him up, holding him close. "Dad," he shouted, his face lighting up. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice cracking. "I missed you so much." For a few minutes, nothing else mattered. I was just a dad reunited with his son, soaking in the warmth of his presence. But reality quickly set in. As we drove to my parents' house, I couldn't help but think about what came next, the legal proceedings, the conversations with Mary, and the daunting task of rebuilding my life. Staying at my parents' house felt strange. It was the same place where I had grown up, filled with memories of simpler times, but now it served as a temporary refuge. My mom had turned the guest room into a makeshift space for Sean and me, complete with his favorite toys and drawings he'd made while I was away. Those first days were all about Sean. I wanted to make up for the time I'd missed, so we spent hours playing in the backyard, reading bedtime stories, and just being together. He seemed happy, but I could see the questions in his eyes, questions he didn't yet know how to ask. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me and said, "Dad, are we going to live here forever?" His words hit me like a ton of bricks. "No, buddy," I said softly. "This is just for now. We'll figure things out, and we'll have our own place soon." "Will Mom be there too?" he asked. I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "No, Sean. Mom and I aren't going to live together anymore. But we both love you so much, and that will never change." He nodded, seeming to accept my answer for now. But I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for him, or for me. A week after I got back, Mary and I met to discuss the divorce and arrangements for Sean. We decided to meet at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop downtown. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Hi, Bill," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mary," I replied, sitting down across from her. The tension was palpable, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. She looked tired, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. Part of me wanted to ask how she was doing, but I knew this wasn't the time for pleasantries. "I've already filed the paperwork," I began, cutting straight to the point. "The lawyer says we should be able to finalize things quickly if we can agree on everything." She nodded. "I've looked it over. I don't want to fight you on this, Bill. I know I messed up, and I don't want to make things harder for you or Sean." Her words surprised me, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of gratitude. At least she wasn't going to drag this out. "I appreciate that," I said. "We need to put Sean first. He's what matters now." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I hate that I hurt you, Bill. And I hate what this is doing to him." Her tears started to fall, and I felt a pang of sympathy, even after everything she'd done. "Mary," I said, my tone firm but not unkind, "what's done is done. We can't change the past, but we can do right by Sean. That's all I care about now." She nodded, wiping her tears. "You're a good dad, Bill. He's lucky to have you." I didn't respond to that. Instead, I stood up and said, "Let's just get through this, for him." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of closure. The conversation hadn't healed the wounds she caused, but it was a step toward moving forward. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I found a small apartment not far from my parents' house, a cozy two-bedroom where Sean could have his own space. I worked on furnishing it, letting him pick out things for his room, a bed shaped like a race car, posters of his favorite superheroes, and shelves for his growing collection of books and toys. It wasn't much, but it was ours. At the same time, I started focusing on myself. I went to the gym regularly, joined a local support group for divorced parents, and leaned on my friends and family for support. Each day felt like a small victory, getting through the paperwork, adjusting to life as a single dad, and finding moments of joy with Sean. One evening, after we'd settled into the new apartment, Sean and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie. He leaned against me, his small hand resting on my arm. "Dad," he said, looking up at me, "I like our new home." I smiled, my chest tightening with emotion. "I'm glad, buddy. This is our place now. Just you and me. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. Life wasn't what I had planned, but it was still good. We were going to be okay. Life in the new apartment began to feel like home. Sean quickly adapted, and his laughter filled the small space with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. The mornings became my favorite part of the day, making pancakes together in the tiny kitchen, his chatter about school filling the air, and the simple joy of being present with him. For me, adjusting to this new chapter was a mix of challenges and unexpected moments of clarity. There were nights when I'd sit alone in the living room after Sean had gone to bed, wondering how I'd ended up here. But there were also moments when I felt proud of the stability I was building for Sean, of the way I was managing to keep moving forward, even when it felt impossible. I started going to therapy, a step I'd resisted for a long time, thinking I could handle everything on my own. But after a few sessions, I realized how much I had been bottling up. Talking about the betrayal, the anger, and the guilt I felt for not noticing sooner was like peeling back layers of an old wound. It wasn't easy, but it helped. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, had a way of cutting through my defenses. "Bill," she said during one session, "you've been through a lot. It's okay to grieve the life you thought you'd have. But don't let that stop you from building a new one." Her words stuck with me. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose how I moved forward. It was during one of Sean's soccer practices that I met Lillian. She was standing on the sidelines, cheering for her nephew, a boy on Sean's team. She had an easy smile and a warmth about her that drew people in. Sean scored a goal that day, and as I clapped and cheered, she turned to me with a grin. "That's your boy?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "He's got more talent than I ever did." We started talking, and I learned that she was a teacher who had recently moved to the area. There was something effortless about our conversation, like we'd known each other for years. Over the next few weeks, we'd run into each other at games and practices, and each time, our conversations grew longer. She asked about Sean, about my life, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself opening up to someone new. As Sean settled into his new routine, I noticed a change in him. He seemed happier, more confident. His teachers called to tell me about his progress in school, how he was making friends and excelling in his classwork. It was a relief to see him thriving, especially after everything he had been through. One evening, as we were finishing dinner, he asked, "Dad, why are you smiling so much lately?" I laughed, caught off guard. "Am I?" "Yeah," he said, grinning. "You didn't smile this much before." I thought about Lillian, about the new sense of hope I'd been feeling, and I realized he was right. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally coming up for air. Lillian and I continued to see each other, and eventually, I invited her over for dinner. She and Sean hit it off immediately. She listened intently as he told her all about his favorite books and his latest soccer games, and by the end of the night, he was asking when she'd come back. Watching them together filled me with a mix of happiness and apprehension. It was still early, and I didn't want to rush anything, but seeing the way Sean lit up around her gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new together. One night, after Sean had gone to bed, I sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking out at the city lights. It had been a long road to get here, filled with heartbreak, uncertainty, and moments when I wasn't sure if I could keep going. But as I sat there, I realized how far I'd come. I was no longer the man stuck in the pain of betrayal. I was a father, a soldier, and a man learning to rebuild his life one step at a time. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this: I would face it with the same resilience and determination that had brought me this far. For Sean, for myself, and for the possibility of love and happiness once again. As the weeks turned into months, my connection with Lillian grew stronger. She became a regular presence in our lives, joining Sean and me for dinner, attending his soccer games, and even helping him with his school projects. One evening, after Sean had gone to bed, we sat on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting a warm light over the room. Lillian turned to me, her expression serious yet kind. "Bill," she began, "I know what you've been through, and I can only imagine how hard it must be to let someone in again. I want you to know, I'm here for you, no expectations, no pressure." Her words caught me off guard. For so long, I'd been carrying the fear of being hurt again, of letting someone close and risking the same pain. But looking at her, I realized she wasn't asking for perfection, just honesty. "I'm trying," I admitted. "It's not easy, but I want to move forward. I want to trust again." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "Then we'll take it one step at a time." In that moment, I felt a shift, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could open my heart again. Sean and I were building a new life, and Lillian was becoming a part of it, one step at a time. Life was slowly falling into place, piece by piece. Sean was thriving in school, and his soccer team had become a second family to him. His laughter filled our apartment, and every time I saw him smile, I felt a sense of purpose that made the hard days worthwhile. My relationship with Lillian continued to deepen, and she became an integral part of our lives. At first, I worried about how Sean would adjust, but he seemed to embrace her presence with open arms. She had a way of connecting with him that was effortless. Whether it was helping him with his math homework or cheering him on at his games, she made him feel valued and loved. One Saturday, we decided to spend the day at a nearby park. Sean had begged to bring his soccer ball, and before long, he had Lillian and me chasing him around the field. For the first time in years, I felt like a family again. As much as I cherished my time with Lillian, I remained focused on being the best father I could be. I was determined not to let my new relationship overshadow my responsibilities to Sean. That meant being present, helping him with his schoolwork, attending every game, and making sure he knew he was my top priority. But finding that balance wasn't always easy. There were moments when guilt crept in, moments when I questioned whether I was doing enough for him. One evening, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Dad, do you like Lillian more than me?" The question caught me off guard, and my heart ached at the thought that he might feel insecure. I knelt down beside his bed, taking his hand in mine. "Sean," I said softly, "no one will ever be more important to me than you. Lillian is a great person, and I really like her, but you're my son. You're my number one. Always." He seemed to consider my words for a moment before nodding. "Okay, Dad. I just wanted to make sure." That conversation stayed with me, reminding me of the delicate balance I needed to maintain. Lillian was important to me, but Sean was my everything, and I would never let him feel otherwise. As things became more serious with Lillian, I knew it was time for her to meet my parents. They had been my biggest supporters through everything, and their opinion mattered to me. We planned a casual dinner at their house, and I could tell Lillian was a little nervous as we walked up to the door. "What if they don't like me?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. "They'll love you," I said reassuringly. "Just be yourself." True to form, my mom welcomed her with open arms, immediately pulling her into a hug. My dad was a bit more reserved, but by the end of the evening, he was laughing at Lillian's stories and asking when we'd be back. As we drove home that night, Lillian turned to me and said, "Your parents are wonderful. I can see where you get it from." Her words warmed my heart, and I realized just how much she was becoming a part of my life, not just mine, but Sean's and my family's as well. A few weeks later, Lillian surprised me with an idea. "Bill, I know you've been trying to juggle everything on your own, but what if we planned something, just the three of us? A little getaway to spend time together." The idea caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the day-to-day that I hadn't considered doing something for us as a family. After some thought, we decided on a weekend trip to the mountains, somewhere Sean could explore and just be a kid. The trip turned out to be exactly what we needed. We hiked, roasted marshmallows over a campfire, and spent hours telling stories under the stars. One night, as Sean drifted off to sleep in the cabin, Lillian and I sat on the porch, watching the moonlight dance across the trees. "This feels right," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It does," I agreed, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since my world had fallen apart, I felt like I was building something strong, something lasting. Lillian wasn't just someone I cared about, she was someone who made me believe in the possibility of happiness again. Life was finally settling into a rhythm. Sean was thriving, Lillian had become a steady part of our lives, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of stability. But as much as things seemed to be moving forward, new challenges began to emerge, challenges that tested my resolve and commitment to this new chapter. The first came in the form of Mary. One afternoon, as I was picking Sean up from school, she called me unexpectedly. It had been months since we'd spoken beyond the basics of co-parenting, and hearing her voice immediately put me on edge. "Bill," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking. I'd like to see Sean more." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Mary, you know the agreement we have. You're welcome to visit him, but you need to coordinate with me first." "I know," she said quickly, "and I appreciate that. But I miss him, and I want to be more involved. I'm trying to make things right." Her words struck a chord. As much as I still harbored resentment, I knew Sean needed both of his parents in his life. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's talk about it. But it has to be about what's best for him, not us." Over the next few weeks, Mary and I worked on building a new co-parenting dynamic. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, times when old wounds threatened to resurface. But every decision I made was centered on Sean. Mary started visiting more regularly, and to my surprise, she seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding her relationship with him. Seeing them together was bittersweet. Part of me felt a pang of sadness for what could have been, but another part was relieved that Sean would have his mother in his life. Lillian was incredibly supportive through it all. "You're doing the right thing," she said one evening as we talked about Mary's renewed involvement. "Sean will thank you for it one day." Her understanding and encouragement meant everything to me. She never tried to take Mary's place in Sean's life, but instead focused on being a positive presence for him. The second challenge came unexpectedly when Sean began to struggle with the changes in his life. One night, as I was tucking him into bed, he burst into tears. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, sitting beside him. "I just miss how things used to be," he said through sobs. "Why can't we all be together again?" His words cut deep, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "I know it's hard, Sean," I said finally, pulling him into a hug. "But sometimes things don't work out the way we want. That doesn't mean we don't love you. Your mom and I will always love you, no matter what." He clung to me, his small frame shaking with emotion. It was a reminder that no matter how much progress I thought we were making, the road ahead would still have its rough patches. Through these challenges, Lillian's presence became even more vital. She had a way of grounding me, reminding me to focus on the progress we were making rather than the setbacks. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment, I opened up to her in a way I hadn't before. "Sometimes, I feel like I'm failing him," I admitted. "You're not failing him, Bill," she said firmly. "You're showing him what it means to keep going, to fight for the people you love. That's the most important thing you can do." Her words stayed with me, and over time, I began to see the truth in them. I wasn't perfect, but I was trying. And that effort, that love, was what mattered most. As the months went by, life began to feel like a new kind of normal. Sean had adjusted to the co-parenting arrangement, spending weekends with Mary while continuing to thrive at home with me. Lillian remained a steady presence, and our relationship deepened with every passing day. One evening, after Sean had gone to bed, Lillian and I sat together on the couch, sharing a quiet moment. She had brought over a photo album she'd been putting together, a collection of memories from our time together so far. I thought it might be nice for Sean to have something to look back on, she said, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of him scoring goals at his soccer games, roasting marshmallows during our mountain trip, and even the silly selfies the three of us had taken at the park. It's perfect, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He's lucky to have you in his life. She looked at me, her expression serious yet soft. And what about you, Bill? Are you happy with where things are? I took her hand in mine, the weight of her question sinking in. I am, I said honestly. I never thought I'd get to this place again. You've been a big part of that. With time, it became clear that Lillian was no longer just someone I was dating, she was becoming family. Sean adored her, often asking when she'd be coming over or if she could join us for dinner. Watching the two of them interact filled me with a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. One day, while Sean was at school, I took Lillian out for a walk along the river. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and the golden leaves crunched beneath our feet as we strolled. There's something I've been thinking about, I began, glancing at her. She raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Oh. Should I be nervous? I chuckled. Maybe a little. Then, I stopped walking and turned to face her. Lillian, you've brought so much light into my life. Into Sean's life. I can't imagine going through this journey without you by my side. Her smile softened, her eyes shining with emotion. Bill. I'm not asking for anything today, I said quickly. But I want you to know how serious I am about us. I see a future with you, and I hope you see the same. She reached up, cupping my face with her hands. I do, Bill. I see it too. The next few weeks felt like a new chapter in our lives. We started talking about what it would mean to merge our lives fully, living arrangements, future plans, and what it would mean for Sean. When we finally sat down with Sean to talk about the idea of Lillian moving in, I was nervous. I didn't want him to feel like his life was being upended again. Sean, I began, how would you feel if Lillian spent more time here? Maybe even lived with us? His eyes lit up. Really? She'd be here all the time? Yeah, I said, smiling. But only if you're okay with it. He nodded enthusiastically. I think it'd be awesome. His excitement melted away any lingering doubts I had. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were building something whole, a family not defined by what we'd lost, but by what we were creating together. Life had a way of surprising me. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd find myself here, standing in the kitchen of a home filled with laughter and warmth, I wouldn't have believed them. Yet, here I was, watching Sean and Lillian decorate a cake, their faces smudged with frosting, their laughter echoing through the room. This was our life now. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but undeniably good. One evening, after Sean had gone to bed, I sat on the balcony of our new house. The stars were bright, the air cool, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. Lillian joined me, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and we sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Do you ever think about how far we've come? I asked, breaking the quiet. All the time, she said, smiling. You've been through so much, Bill, but look at you now. Look at us. You rebuilt your life with so much strength and love. That's something to be proud of. Her words hit me deeply. The road here hadn't been easy, betrayal, heartbreak, and moments of doubt had threatened to break me. But with every challenge, I'd found a way forward, driven by my love for Sean and the hope for a brighter future. I couldn't have done it alone, I admitted, looking at her. You were a big part of that. She shook her head gently. You had it in you all along. I just reminded you of it. In the weeks that followed, Lillian officially moved in, and we began planning for our future together. We talked about everything, what kind of home we wanted to build, how to support Sean as he grew, and even the possibility of expanding our family one day. Sean thrived in this new environment. His confidence grew, his laughter became more frequent, and he often told me how much he loved having Lillian around. Watching him grow into a happy, well-rounded kid filled me with pride and gratitude. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Sean looked at us and said, "This is the best family ever." His words brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't the family I had envisioned when he was born, but it was a family built on love, resilience, and second chances. Looking back, I realized that life has a way of testing us, of pushing us to the brink to see what we're made of. The pain I went through, the doubts and fears, it all led me here, to a life that was fuller and more meaningful than I ever thought possible. I had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about learning from it, growing through it, and finding the strength to move forward. It was about embracing the people who stood by you and building a future worth fighting for. As I sat on the couch that night, with Lillian resting her head on my shoulder and Sean's laughter still ringing in my ears, I knew one thing for certain, I was exactly where I was meant to be.